It's actually the people around the whole world logging onto Netflix last night to find not one, not two, but 3 episodes from the new Harry and Meghan documentary. And after years of speculation, we got to hear their side of the story, their relationship, and also what happens beyond the tabloid.
It began, according to reports, not with a public statement, not with a confrontation, and not with the kind of royal drama the world could see coming. It began with an alleged attempt at contact, a quiet approach said to have reached toward Catherine, Princess of Wales, at a moment when silence itself may have carried more power than any reply. 4 years, the story surrounding Catherine and Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, has been shaped by distance, interpretation, and unresolved questions. The public has seen headlines, interviews, carefully worded statements, and moments where the 2 women appear to represent very different royal futures. But if the latest claims are accurate, this reported attempt at contact may have touched something far more sensitive than family disagreement. It may have tested whether the door between the Sussexes and the working royal world was still open in any meaningful way. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed that Meghan made a final personal attempt to reach Catherine, and there has been no official statement suggesting that such a message was received or refused. That distinction matters. In royal reporting, there is often a difference between confirmed fact, reported claim, and emotional interpretation. Yet the reason this story has gained attention is because it fits into a much larger pattern that royal observers have been watching for years: the gradual hardening of boundaries around the future of the monarchy. And at the center of that boundary, according to some commentators, stands Catherine. This is what makes the situation so emotionally charged. Catherine is not usually associated with confrontation. Her public image has been built around composure, restraint, family duty, and a style of royal service that avoids dramatic gestures. She rarely responds directly to controversy, and that silence has often become part of her strength. But silence can mean different things in royal life. Sometimes it means dignity, sometimes it means protection, and sometimes, when a relationship has been tested too many times, it becomes the clearest answer a person can give. So if Catherine did indeed refuse to engage with an alleged final approach from Meghan, the meaning would not simply be personal. It would be symbolic. It would suggest that the Princess of Wales may now understand her role not only as a wife, mother, and future queen, but as someone whose smallest action can affect the emotional stability of the crown. A private reply, even one written with kindness, could be interpreted as an opening. A short acknowledgement could become a headline. A single conversation could be read as reconciliation, negotiation, hesitation, or weakness, depending on who tells the story afterward. And for a monarchy still trying to protect its future image, that risk may have become too great to ignore. But was this really about Meghan, or was it about what Meghan's access now represents? That question sits quietly beneath the surface of this entire story. Because the relationship between the Sussexes and the royal family is no longer just a family wound. It has become a question of trust, public narrative, institutional protection, and the limits of forgiveness when private pain has repeatedly become public debate. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, has often been portrayed by royal commentators as deeply protective of his family's peace, especially where Catherine and their children are concerned. King Charles III, meanwhile, has had to carry the burden of a father and a monarch, balancing personal feeling against the stability of the institution he leads. In that difficult space, Catherine's position is uniquely exposed. She is not the monarch, and she is not the heir, but she is increasingly seen by many as one of the monarchy's most important emotional anchors. Her choices are watched not only as personal decisions, but as signs of what the next royal era may value. If she appears open, it may suggest healing. If she remains silent, it may suggest finality. If she draws a boundary, it may tell the public that the future queen is no longer willing to allow old conflict to define the path ahead. That is why a reported refusal, if true, would feel so much larger than one message left unanswered. For Meghan, the alleged attempt would carry its own emotional weight. Since stepping back from royal duties alongside Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, she has remained one of the most debated figures connected to the royal family. To her supporters, she represents independence, survival, and a woman who challenged an institution that did not protect her enough. To her critics, she represents rupture, public disclosure, and a wound the monarchy has struggled to close. Any attempt to reach Catherine would therefore arrive already burdened by years of interpretation. It could not be received as an ordinary family message because nothing between them now feels ordinary to the public. And that is the tragedy of royal distance. Once trust is damaged inside a family that also functions as a national institution, even a private gesture can lose its innocence. A message is no longer just a message. A call is no longer just a call. A meeting is no longer simply a meeting between two women who once shared the same royal stage. Everything becomes a possible signal, a possible story, a possible opening for a new wave of commentary. Catherine may know that better than anyone. According to some royal watchers, her greatest strength has not been dramatic response, but the ability to absorb pressure without allowing it to dictate her public conduct. Yet that same strength can become a burden when others expect endless grace from her. How many times can one person be asked to keep the peace? How many times can restraint be mistaken for permission? And when does compassion become dangerous if it reopens a door that the family has worked carefully to close? Those are the questions that make this reported moment so powerful. Because if Catherine chose silence, it may not have been an act of cruelty. It may have been the decision of someone who understood that the monarchy's future cannot keep circling the same unresolved conflict. The Princess of Wales has spent years becoming a symbol of steadiness, and steadiness sometimes requires refusing to be pulled back into a story that has already taken too much emotional space. For the public, that may look cold. For the palace, it may look necessary. For Catherine herself, if the reports are accurate, it may have been one of the hardest kinds of decisions, a boundary drawn without anger, but also without retreat. Still, the larger mystery remains. What exactly was Meghan reportedly hoping to achieve through this alleged final approach? Was it reconciliation, reputation repair, personal closure, or one last attempt to prove that a royal door had not fully closed? And if Catherine's silence truly became the answer, what does that reveal about the future relationship between the Sussexes and the heart of the monarchy? To understand why this reported refusal has become so significant, we have to look at what the silence may have protected, what it may have ended, and why one unanswered message could now feel like a turning point in the royal family's long and painful divide. What the silence may have protected is the part of a story that royal observers are now studying most closely, because a refusal, if it happened, would not only close a personal exchange, it would protect a boundary that has become central to the monarchy's ability to move forward. In ordinary family life, silence can be painful, even unfair. But inside the royal world, silence can also be strategy, and strategy often appears cold only because the alternative would be far more damaging. According to some commentators, the alleged approach from Meghan would have arrived into a royal household that has spent years learning one difficult lesson. Private contact does not remain private for long when the wider story is already loaded with mistrust. A message can be described, a tone can be interpreted, a sentence can be taken apart. A conversation meant to heal can become another public disagreement about who was sincere, who was responsible, and who failed to understand the other side. That is why the question was never simply whether Catherine should answer. It was whether any answer could remain harmless once it existed. This is where the situation becomes larger than one woman refusing another. Catherine's public silence, if the reports are accurate, may have protected the future shape of the royal household from being pulled backward into an old pattern. For years, every attempt to discuss reconciliation between the Sussexes and the working royals has carried the same risk. Hope on one side, suspicion on the other, and a public waiting to decide who behaved more nobly. But the monarchy cannot function forever as a stage for unresolved family pain. At some point, royal observers believe the institution must decide whether healing is still possible or whether distance has become the only way to preserve stability. And that decision affects far more people than Catherine and Meghan. For William, the issue is likely to be understood through protection rather than public image alone. The Prince of Wales has a future role that requires discipline, emotional control, and a careful understanding of what can be allowed near the center of royal life. If Catherine were drawn into another cycle of contact, interpretation, and possible public fallout, it would not simply affect her privately. It could affect the emotional foundation of the Wales family, the image of the future king and queen, and the calm they are expected to project as the monarchy moves toward its next era. That may explain why some royal watchers see the alleged refusal as a turning point, not because it was dramatic, but because it was controlled. A dramatic response would have created noise. A harsh statement would have created sympathy for the other side. A carefully worded palace line might have kept the story alive for days. But silence leaves very little to debate. It gives no quotation, no opening, no emotional performance. It may wound, but it also protects. And in a family where words have often become weapons, the absence of words can become the strongest defense. But was Catherine's reported silence only personal self-protection, or was it also part of a wider royal calculation? That question matters because the monarchy is currently operating in a period where fewer people carry greater weight. King Charles has his own reign to define. Queen Camilla has her own public role to sustain. William and Catherine are increasingly viewed as the future. Princess and the Princess Royal continues to represent duty and resilience. Against that backdrop, the Sussex question is not merely a private family wound. It is a question of how much disruption the institution can allow near those who are expected to carry its next chapter. For Meghan, the alleged silence would carry a different meaning. If she truly hoped for contact, even a brief one, then the lack of response would not simply feel like distance. It would suggest that the emotional route back toward the royal center has become almost impossible to reopen. Publicly, there can still be polite statements, family references, and carefully managed moments of restraint. But privately, according to this interpretation, the line may have become firmer than many people realized. The difficulty for Meghan is that silence does not give her a clear opponent. It does not argue. It does not accuse. It simply refuses to participate. That kind of refusal can be more final than anger. It also places Prince Harry in a deeply complicated position. The Duke of Sussex remains connected to the royal family by birth, memory, and history, yet his life now exists largely outside the working structure of the crown. If Meghan's alleged approach was partly an attempt to soften the atmosphere around them, then Catherine's reported non-response would reveal how little personal goodwill may remain available as a bridge. Harry may still be the king's son and William's brother, but the route back toward trust may no longer run through emotion. It may require something far more difficult: time, consistency, and a public silence of his own. And this is where the story begins to reveal its deeper institutional layer. The monarchy has survived crises before, but it survives them by controlling access to the center. Access is not only about invitations or rooms or formal events. It is about who can influence the narrative, who can create uncertainty, who can draw senior royals back into unresolved conflict, and who can make the future look unstable. If Catherine is now viewed as one of the central figures protecting that future, then any approach toward her carries significance beyond the personal. Some royal commentators believe this is why the alleged timing matters so much. A message sent at a sensitive point, if that is what happened, would not be received as a simple emotional gesture. It would be examined for consequence. Why now? Why Catherine? Why not a formal channel? Why not allow time and distance to do what direct contact may no longer be able to do? These questions do not prove motive, and responsible analysis should not pretend they do. But they do explain why the palace, if faced with such a situation, might choose the safest response: no response at all. The tragedy is that silence can protect the future while still deepening the wound. It may prevent another public storm, but it also confirms that something once imagined as reparable has entered a much colder stage. Catherine's reported decision would therefore carry two meanings at once. To her supporters, it may look like strength. To Meghan's supporters, it may look like rejection. To the monarchy, it may look like discipline. And to royal history, it may one day look like the moment when emotional access and royal access finally separated. Because that is the heart of the story. Meghan may still belong to the family in the broadest human sense, through marriage, children, and shared history. But belonging to the family is not the same as belonging inside the trusted working circle of the monarchy. That circle is narrower, more guarded, and far less forgiving of anything that might threaten public trust. If Catherine's silence has become the symbol of that separation, then the message is not only personal, it is structural. And once that possibility entered the conversation, the story moved into far more sensitive territory, because behind the visible refusal another question was beginning to emerge. Was this truly Catherine's boundary alone, or had the palace already decided that the final door had to close before anyone could try to open it again? If the palace had already decided that the final door had to close, then Catherine's reported silence begins to look less like an isolated personal choice and more like the visible edge of a much deeper royal calculation. Because inside the monarchy, the most consequential decisions are not always announced. Sometimes they are revealed through what does not happen, the call that is not returned, the invitation that is not extended, the clarification that never arrives, and the silence that gradually becomes impossible to misunderstand. That is what makes this alleged moment so important. If the reports are accurate, the refusal was not only about whether Catherine wished to speak to Meghan. It was about whether the royal household could risk allowing one private exchange to reopen a public story it has spent years trying to contain. The monarchy has always survived by controlling access, rhythm, and message. But the Sussex rupture made that control more difficult because the conflict no longer existed only inside palace walls. It existed in interviews, memoirs, documentaries, commentary panels, and the court of public opinion. So any contact now carries historical weight. Royal watchers know that family estrangements inside the monarchy are never purely emotional. They become institutional problems because family roles are tied to public duty. A brother is not only a brother. A daughter-in-law is not only a daughter-in-law. A future queen is not only a private woman making a personal decision. Each relationship carries symbolism, and each gesture can be read as a sign of weakness, forgiveness, defiance, or control. If Catherine had answered an alleged approach from Meghan, even in the gentlest possible way, that answer might have created a new interpretation before anyone could control it. This is where the power dynamic becomes more complicated. Meghan, according to reports, may have been seeking contact at a moment when the emotional bridge back to the royal center seemed almost gone. Catherine, by contrast, would be receiving that reported outreach from a position of growing institutional importance. She is not simply a figure from the past conflict anymore. She is part of the monarchy's future architecture. And that changes everything, because access to Catherine is no longer just access to a person. It is access to one of the most trusted symbols of what the crown hopes to become. Was this why the reported silence felt so final? Some commentators believe the answer lies in the difference between reconciliation and access. Reconciliation can exist privately, in theory, as a hope or a distant possibility. Access is something much more practical and much more dangerous. Access creates opportunity. It creates proximity. It creates the possibility of new claims, new interpretations, and new emotional pressure. The palace may be willing to leave space for distant civility, but that is very different from allowing the Sussex story to move back toward the heart of the future monarchy. For William, that distinction may be especially important. The Prince of Wales has been shaped by the painful reality that private family wounds can become public battles. He also carries the responsibility of protecting not only his own standing, but Catherine's peace and the stability of their children's future. If one alleged message to Catherine could be seen as a route back into royal intimacy, then William would almost certainly understand the risk. Not because compassion has disappeared, but because trust, once publicly broken, cannot be rebuilt through one emotional appeal. And Charles's position is no less difficult. As king, he must preserve the dignity of the crown while also living with the human pain of a fractured family. He cannot be only a father, and he cannot be only a monarch. Every decision sits between those two roles. That is why the reported silence surrounding Catherine, if it reflects a wider palace attitude, may reveal something painful about the current reign. The king may still hope for peace, but the institution may no longer be willing to pay any price for it. That contradiction is one of the most revealing parts of a story. A family may want healing, but a monarchy needs control. A father may want connection, but a sovereign must consider consequence. A future queen may feel sorrow, but she must also understand what her response could unleash. This is where the emotional and institutional worlds collide. And if Catherine's reported refusal was supported, quietly or indirectly, by the wider royal household, then the message would be unmistakable. The royal family may no longer see every emotional appeal as an opportunity for repair. Some may now be viewed as risks to be managed. For Meghan, that would be a devastating shift. It would mean that the question is no longer whether she can explain herself, reach out, or ask for one more conversation. It would mean that the central issue has moved beyond explanation and into trust. And trust inside the monarchy is not restored by urgency. It is restored by time, discretion, consistency, and the absence of fresh damage. That may be the hardest part of the Sussex story now. The door that once might have been reopened by emotion may now require proof that no one is trying to force it open. Harry stands at the center of that contradiction too. He remains royal by birth, yet his public choices have helped create distance from the institution he once served. Some observers believe his position is now more complicated than Meghan's because he carries both the memory of belonging and the reality of separation. If Catherine's reported silence was meant to protect the future, then it may also signal that the old family routes Harry once knew are no longer available in the same way. The brotherhood, the shared history, the private childhood bond with William, none of that disappears, but none of it automatically restores institutional confidence either. And that is where the larger shift begins to come into focus. The royal family may be moving from a period of emotional reaction into a period of controlled separation. In the earlier years after the Sussexes stepped back, every development felt like part of an ongoing argument. Each interview, each allegation, each response or non-response created another wave of speculation. But now, according to some royal commentators, the palace may be choosing something colder and more strategic, not constant rebuttal, not dramatic confrontation, but distance so disciplined that it leaves very little to grasp. That strategy can be powerful, but it also carries risk. Silence can protect the institution, but it can also make the monarchy appear unforgiving. Boundaries can preserve peace, but they can also harden into permanent division. A refusal can prevent another public storm, but it can also confirm that the family has reached a place where repair is no longer actively being pursued. This is why Catherine's alleged response, or lack of one, has attracted so much attention. It sits at the meeting point of dignity and finality, of self-protection and institutional control. Historical parallels make the moment feel even heavier. The monarchy has often chosen distance when private relationships threatened public stability. It has relied on time to cool scandal, ceremony to restore order, and silence to deny conflict a stronger voice. But the modern media world does not always allow silence to remain neutral. It interprets silence. It gives silence a motive. It turns silence into a headline. So if Catherine's silence is now being read as a final boundary, the palace may discover that even restraint can become a public statement when the world is determined to hear one. And yet, from the monarchy's point of view, there may have been no safer option. A reply could have been misread. A meeting could have been leaked or interpreted. A polite acknowledgement could have been framed as a thaw. But silence, however painful, preserved the line. It did not explain. It did not negotiate. It did not offer a phrase that could be used later. It simply allowed the boundary to stand. That is why Section 3 brings the hidden pieces closer together. The reported attempt was never only about contact. Catherine's alleged refusal was never only about hurt. The palace's possible support was never only about coldness. All of it points toward a monarchy that may be trying to protect its future by limiting the reach of unresolved conflict. But even that does not explain the most sensitive part of the story, because the real turning point may not be the silence itself. It may be what happened when that silence began to carry the full authority of the institution behind it. If Catherine's reported silence began to carry the weight of the institution behind it, then the story changed completely. It was no longer only about one woman choosing not to respond to another. It became a sign that the monarchy may have reached a point where silence was not hesitation but strategy. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed any final attempt by Meghan to contact Catherine, nor has it confirmed that any refusal took place. But if royal commentators are correct that an alleged approach was met with no response, then the deeper implication is difficult to ignore. The palace may have decided that the safest way to handle the Sussex question is no longer discussion, correction, or emotional engagement. It may be distance, and distance in royal life is rarely accidental. For Catherine, that distance would carry a personal cost. Her public image has long been built around calm, kindness, and restraint. But those qualities can become heavy when people expect endless grace from someone who has already carried years of pressure. If the alleged message was aimed at her directly, it placed her in a painful position. A reply could be seen as generous, but it could also reopen a door the monarchy may have worked hard to close. Silence could protect peace, but it could also make her appear cold to those who wanted reconciliation. Was this about personal hurt, or was it about protecting the future image of the crown? That question matters because Catherine is no longer just a royal figure caught in an old family dispute. She is part of the monarchy's future. Anything connected to her now carries meaning beyond the private moment. A call, a message, a meeting, or even a small acknowledgement could be interpreted as a signal that the emotional path back toward the royal center still exists. And if the palace no longer wants that uncertainty, then silence becomes the cleanest line available. For William, the stakes are equally serious. The Prince of Wales must protect not only his wife, but the future monarchy they are expected to represent together. If one reported approach toward Catherine could create a new wave of headlines, speculation, and emotional pressure, then his concern would be easy to understand. The future king cannot allow the next era to be constantly pulled back into the battles of the last one. That is why some observers may see Catherine's alleged silence as part of a harder whale strategy. Not revenge, not cruelty, but a refusal to keep feeding a story that has already taken years of attention from the institution. William and Catherine cannot build a stable future if every old wound is allowed to return through a new private message, a new interpretation, or a new public debate about who should forgive whom. But this strategy carries risk. To Catherine's supporters, the reported refusal may look like strength. To Meghan's defenders, it may look like exclusion. To the monarchy, it may look like discipline. And to the public, it becomes something larger, a test of what people believe the royal family should do when trust has been badly damaged. Should it keep the door open in the name of family, or should it close the door in the name of peace? No answer is simple, because the royal family is both a family and an institution. A normal family might try again, even after years of pain. But the monarchy has to consider what every gesture might become once it reaches the public. A private conversation may not stay private. A kind reply may become a headline. A moment of softness may be interpreted as a new negotiation. And once that happens, the palace loses control of the story again. For King Charles, the alleged moment would reveal the painful limits of his position. As a father, he may still carry sorrow over the distance from Harry and Meghan. But as monarch, his first duty is to protect the stability of the crown. If the institution has quietly allowed Catherine's reported silence to stand, it may suggest that the monarchy is now choosing containment over emotional repair. That does not mean forgiveness is impossible forever, but it may mean that access is no longer available simply because someone asks for it. Trust would have to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, and without pressure. And that may be the hardest part of the Sussex story now. The door may not have closed because of one message. It may have closed because the palace no longer believes one message can undo years of damage. This is the turning point. Catherine's reported silence may have started as a private non-response, but it now feels like something much larger. It suggests that the monarchy may be moving from uncertainty into separation, from emotional hesitation into controlled finality, from hoping the Sussex issue will fade into making sure it cannot keep reaching the heart of royal life. But even then, one question remained unanswered, and it was the question that could define the entire story. If Catherine's silence has become the symbol of a closed door, what does that silence reveal about the future of the monarchy, the limits of forgiveness, and the true cost of protecting peace? If Catherine's silence has become the symbol of a closed door, then its meaning reaches far beyond one reported attempt at contact. It becomes a reflection of how the monarchy may now be choosing to survive the most painful parts of its recent history, not by answering every claim, not by reopening every private wound, but by deciding which relationships can remain close to the crown and which must remain at a careful distance. That is why this story matters. Not because Buckingham Palace has confirmed the alleged message, and not because the public knows every private detail behind it. It matters because the reaction to the story reveals something much larger about the modern royal family. The monarchy is no longer simply managing image. It is managing access, trust, emotional safety, and the fragile line between family forgiveness and institutional protection. And in that space, Catherine has become more than a participant in an old royal disagreement. She has become a symbol of where the future monarchy may choose to draw its boundaries. For some royal watchers, the reported refusal will look like the natural result of years of public strain. They may see Catherine's silence as restraint finally becoming self-protection, the decision of a future queen who understands that peace cannot survive if the same door is opened again and again without trust being rebuilt first. In that interpretation, the silence is not punishment. It is preservation. It is the quiet recognition that some relationships cannot be restored through urgency, emotion, or timing alone. But others will see it differently. Meghan supporters may argue that silence, however strategic, still feels severe when the story is framed as one woman reaching out and another declining to respond. They may ask whether a family can ever heal if even private contact becomes impossible. They may see the alleged refusal as proof that the royal household has become too guarded, too cautious, and too unwilling to allow any softer path back into conversation. And that disagreement is exactly why the story has become so powerful. It does not only divide opinion about Catherine and Meghan. It divides opinion about what the monarchy should value most, mercy or stability. The difficult truth is that the crown often cannot choose only one. It must appear humane without appearing vulnerable. It must protect family dignity without inviting fresh public battles. It must leave space for private emotion while ensuring that private emotion does not become institutional risk. That is the burden of royal life in the modern age. Every personal choice can become public meaning. Every unanswered message can become a statement. Every silence can be interpreted as either strength or coldness, depending on who is watching. For William and Catherine, the long-term consequence may be a clearer separation between the future they are building and the conflicts that have surrounded the Sussexes. If the reports are accurate, the message beneath the silence is that the Wales family will not allow the next royal era to be defined by unresolved arguments from the last one. That does not erase pain. It does not rewrite history. But it does suggest that the future monarchy may be moving toward a more disciplined model of engagement, where access is earned through trust rather than assumed through family connection alone. For Harry and Meghan, that would be a deeply significant shift. It would mean that public visibility and royal access are no longer connected in the way they once were. They may still command attention. They may still shape headlines. They may still remain part of the wider royal story because of who they are and where they came from. But attention is not the same as influence, and visibility is not the same as belonging inside the trusted center of the crown. If Catherine's alleged silence has meaning, it may be that the emotional path back to that center has become far narrower than many once believed. For King Charles, this story reveals the painful complexity of legacy. A monarch does not only inherit a throne. He inherits wounds, tensions, loyalties, unfinished arguments, and the responsibility to ensure that the next generation is not weakened by them. Charles may still desire peace in his family, but peace cannot always be built through direct contact. Sometimes it requires distance, discipline, and the refusal to let old conflicts consume the future. That may be one of the hardest realities of this reign. The king must hold both the sorrow of a father and the caution of a sovereign. And for the monarchy itself, the broader historical meaning is clear. The institution appears to be entering a phase where the future is being protected more openly, even if the methods remain quiet. Royal observers will be watching not only for public reunions or dramatic statements, but for patterns of distance, restraint, and controlled visibility. They will watch whether William and Catherine continue to be placed at the emotional center of the monarchy's next chapter. They will watch whether Harry and Meghan remain outside the trusted working circle. And they will watch whether silence becomes the royal family's preferred answer whenever old wounds threaten to return. That is what makes the reported moment feel bigger than one alleged message. It suggests a monarchy learning that survival may depend on refusing to be pulled into every emotional storm. In the past, royal silence often meant mystery. Now it may mean strategy. It may mean that the palace has decided not every bridge can be rebuilt publicly, not every wound can be discussed safely, and not every relationship can be allowed near the future of the crown until trust has been restored in ways the public may never fully see. Still, the final meaning remains open to interpretation. Was Catherine's reported silence an act of strength, a sign of exhaustion, or the clearest expression yet of a palace boundary that had already been forming behind the scenes? Was Meghan's alleged attempt a genuine search for healing, or a final test of whether the royal door still recognized her voice? And if no answer came, does that mean the story has ended, or simply that the royal family has chosen to continue it in silence? So what do you think? Was this simply one royal development shaped by reports and speculation, or does it point to a much larger shift inside the monarchy? Has Catherine protected her peace, or has the palace allowed one silence to become the final symbol of separation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary-style royal story. Because in the end, the most powerful royal message is not always spoken aloud. Sometimes it is the silence that tells the world a door has closed and that the future has already begun moving on.